Hey, good morning, sloth knitters. Hey, there's been some discussion in the group about the different ways that are the provisional cast on. So Tin Can Knits does it a little bit differently on her photo tutorial on her blog than I did in the video last night. And so I just wanted to talk about that. And then there's a question about that difference in conjunction with the setup row for the collar. When you start, if you look at the pattern, there's a setup row on the wrong side before you actually begin the proper garter stitch. And so comparing those two methods, and if one or the other might add an extra row to your collar, and if you care or if that would bother you. But in the interest of sticking to what the pattern says and helping learn new knitters to learn, it's worth investigating and seeing if you need to decide about that. So the way Tin Can Knits does it on her blog is rather, whoops, sorry, I already jacked that up. Rather than knitting her provisional cast on or crocheting it around the knitting needle, she simply starts out with a straight up regular crochet chain, just like your normal single crochet chain, and then she picks up the backside bumps, and I'll show you that. Let me do a few of these and make sure we have enough, because we'll do, I don't know, maybe we'll just do 12 or whatever, but that's okay. Then, so after she's done that, you see how you have the flat side of your crochet chain, and on the back you have these little bumps. They're like little, dinosaur bumps. I don't know why I said that. Like they're like the back of a dinosaur. So what she does is simply go into one of those, into that, being careful not to split the stitch. And let me find the end of my yarn here, which I have a huge mess going, because I'm trying to demonstrate off the back, front and the back side of a skein, and that's not working so well. Okay. Here we go. Then she's just going around as if to knit and drawing a loop through. Okay, then you find the next little bump and do the same thing. Okay, so we're just knitting into those little bumps here in the back. So let me do a few of those. And the direction of your knitting, if you'll notice, you're going to be finishing this process on the left side, which would be, this is like the same as knitting. You're knitting down your crochet chain. You're knitting across your crochet chain headed to the left, which is why you would need to purl your way back across, and that's why she's added the setup row, which if you do it my way, the setup row may not be necessary, but that's what we're going to verify. A gal in the group, JC, shout out to her for noticing this discrepancy, because I had not, in all honesty, noticed that until she brought it up. So I do appreciate that attention to detail. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. Okay, we'll go with 14. All right, so now our working yarn's on the left, and we've just gone across from right to left, and we've knitted into that crochet chain. Okay, so put that on hold for a moment. All right, the way I showed you originally was like this. So we're making our crochet chain around our beginning needle. So basically we're just combining the first two steps, whereas Tin Can Knits made her crochet chain and then she went and picked up all these bumps. We're doing a 2-in-1, and we're putting those bumps on our knitting needle to begin with. Okay, so, however, because we're doing a 2-in-1, that actually makes it so that our work, whoops, I just split that stitch, hang on just a second. Because we're doing a 2-in-1, our working yarn is going to be on the opposite side. Our working yarn is going to be on the right side instead of the left side of our row when we get done with this, because we've combined those steps. So what I'm thinking is, if you want to remain true to the pattern and you have exactly the same number of rows, you may, if you're doing this the way I am and you haven't already started, or if it bothers you enough to take it out, you may wish to omit that setup row in the very beginning. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Okay, I have 3 too many, so I'm just going to slip those off the end here. That's all right, because they'll just collapse down and become bumps on the back. That's fine. Okay, now we're going to knit into those in the same way we would have before. All right, so to clarify, when Tin Can Knits did hers, when she picks this up and basically knits into it, not only is she picking up that bump on the back of the chain, but she's also knitting into it, right? By pulling up. So we haven't knitted into it yet. And so what happened was, if I wanted to make this look exactly like that, like hers, I would need to go ahead and start here and knit into all these bumps and go back. And then I'd be on the same side with my working yarn as she is. Does that make sense? I'd be on the same side of my working yarn on the left. Whereas right now, if I go ahead and start on this, and I do my setup row by purling into this first bump, this first waste yarn stitch, as I did in the first video, I have basically omitted one tiny row here. She's actually kind of added a row, and I have not. So do you see the difference? If I do, okay, let me restate that. If I start like I did on the instructional video, the official one on YouTube, if I purl into this and go back and start that as my setup row, I'm going to have a different right side and wrong side than she is. And it's garter stitch, so it's hard to tell which is the right side and wrong side anyway. So you just need to make that choice. Like, if you want to be true to the pattern, then go ahead and knit into this one row. Knit into it one row so that you begin on the left side like she is. Because if you do like I did and you purl into it and go ahead and start right in with your setup row, you're going to be a little bit off. Okay, let's go ahead, and for the sake of seeing the difference, we'll go ahead and do a tiny little sample of both of these and see. Okay, so I went ahead and started right in with the setup row by purling 2 and then knitting to the end. All right, so I finished a few rows of garter stitch, and you can see this is the portion here where we, on the other side, on row, well, let me see which row it is. Okay, and this is the wrong side where we purl 2 and knit to the end. So you can see there's our purl 2 bumps, and then there's our knit stitch. So when we turn to the right side, we have that, you know, knitted edge, the knit stitch edge that's on the top of the illustration. So the illustration in the pattern is like this with your provisional cast on, and then you have this knitted extra knit stitches that are kind of that top border where we're going to pick up. Okay, so now here, my extra little crochet chain, this is my unzipping point. That is now on the left after I have completed an even number of rows. Okay, so I have my foundation, 2 garter stitch ridges, plus the purl row that's on the needle. All right, let's compare then. Now here, you'll notice right away it's opposite, where I have that unzip chain on the right, whereas on mine it was on the left. Okay, so now let's go ahead and do the rest of the rows and compare how everything looks. All right, let's check this out now. I've knitted, let's see, I'm just going to get my camera to focus so you can see. So I have 2 garter stitch rows plus the last row, which appears on this side, the right side, to look like a purl bump. So I have 2 garter stitch rows plus the purl bump that's on the needle. And then if we're doing a mini version, we would, you know, knit, or a tab for a shawl, for example, we would knit across this top, and then we'll be over here in this corner when we go to unzip our chain and pick up those stitches, which we will do in just a moment. And so that's the way that I did the cast on. And the way the blog indicates would be here, where it looks the same, and you have 2 garter stitch ridges plus the purl bump or the row that's on your needle. Now, one difference that you can tell right away is that the end of the working yarn that I begin with is on the right side here, whereas on mine, it's on the left. See here? The end, the tail end is on the left here. And the opposite, the same is true, sorry, not the opposite, but this is my original slip knot where I started my chain. And here, the original slip knot is on the left. So things are opposite. Let's see what difference that makes when we go around to pick up the chain. So keeping in the same order, I'll do mine first. All I'm going to do next is just knit across the top here. I'll pick up a few stitches here, and then we'll see how it is to unzip the chain. Okay, so I've done that, knitted across here, knitted across the top. Now this is going to be a little bit tight just because everything is so short, but we'll make it work. Now, one difference is that my slip knot's down here, so my chain is going to unzip from this end, which is convenient. All I need to do is loosen the tail where I tucked it in right there, and I should be good to go to just to unzip. Okay, so I should be able to just unzip here carefully, and I'm going to hang on to this tail so that I don't lose it, because that would be something awkward to deal with. Now, I'm going to choose to go ahead and pull this through and magic loop it, and pull this through and curl my needle around so I have less tension and I can actually see what it is I'm doing. So I'm going to unzip this, and I can see that there's right there is something I need to pick up. I'm going to choose to go into it from the back, so I'm hopefully orienting my stitches onto the needle properly. All right, now I'm going to unzip, and I'm going to pop those off just like we did in the instructional part 1 video, and I'm catching that before I actually undo the whole thing. Whoops, I'm not sure why I'm twisted there. Just go with it. For some reason I had a twist up. Okay, you can see the next one's right here. So I like to kind of poke in my needle right away so I don't risk dropping it. Okay, same way here. So because I have my chain zipped up this side, my starting point to unzip was here. And so I can unzip carefully as I go. All right, so that's one difference, and I'll show you that in a moment. Okay, so you get the idea here. All right, so now I've picked up all these stitches across the top, and we're ready to, what I'm gonna have to do here now, because my working yarn is back here still, I'm gonna need to, put these on the other end or put them on a double pointed needle. The reason I don't mind doing that though is because now I know that I haven't missed any of them and that I didn't drop any. So I'm just gonna go back and pick these all up and put it on the left-hand needle, and then I'll be ready to continue knitting with my working yarn, which is back here. Okay, now I'm working back across the stitches I picked up and then placed back on the left needle so I could knit back across. All right, what I want to do is get this to that point, and then we will compare and count rows with each method. Okay. All right, so let me loosen this all up and get this placed on the needle, which now we kind of have this little horseshoe, pretend this is a mini collar. But what I'm concerned about mostly here is just the integrity of the garter stitch. So I have 3 ridges, all right? You can see I have 3 ridges here and a knit row. So we'll compare. We'll do the other one also and see what that's going to look like. Okay, so now we're back to the original method, and I'm just going to knit across the top here as we would, because this is the right side, and then we would pick up the stitches down the left, and I decided I'll just use a 3rd double pointed needle to do that. Obviously this is a mini version. If you were doing this for real, you'd have your 100 and whatever rows, or 60 or 70 garter stitch ridges, whereas I'm not going to that extent for this little experiment. Okay, so now one difference is the side of the chain that we're going to unzip is on this side rather than up near our working yarn, and that's okay. It's just going to require a little more attention and care. So the first thing we're going to do, as before, is get a hold of this tail and undo it so we can begin to unzip our chain. Okay, so there's that. All right. Now I'm going to start carefully unzipping. And see, when I did this before on my sample, I was over here on this other end. Okay, so that's all right. It's just going to take it's just, you'll need another needle, which is 6s really, because I went and got another needle and placed those stitches on, you know, I redid them, or if you will. Okay, I'm going in and poking that in. You can see the yarn that I need to poke into right there. And that's not difficult at all. And you can still control it and unzip it in the same way that I did from the other direction. Okay. So far I'm thinking these two methods are pretty equivalent. It's just a matter of whether we're going to end up with an extra row or not. Which, truthfully, I'm not convinced that we will. But I wouldn't be the first time I was wrong. So let's see. Whoops, I just split that stitch. So let's just be careful, and there we go. Okay. So you see how I'm unpicking this. Okay, so I have our same stitches that we picked up, and now we're just going to knit back across to the end so that we are ending up at the same place we did on my work, and then we'll compare and see if we have the same number of ridges and valleys. Okay, so when we look at this, we would just want to compare whether we have the same number of ridges and valleys as we did in both samples. So when I look at this, I see the 2 ridges, and there's the 3rd ridge, and then there's your setup to come back across and knit. In the 3rd one, it does, in my sample with the cable there, it does appear that there's an extra knitted row and a little bit more of a flat spot right there. So you may have an extra wide valley, if you will. Truly, I think that's pretty negligible, but you'll have to decide how you feel about that and which method of picking up the garter stitch, which method of picking up the provisional cast on is more workable and easier for you to do. So that's going to be really personal preference. Yeah, I don't think that's something I'm going to go back and alter at this point. But I do appreciate JC for pointing out, and I appreciate the attention to detail, certainly. And it was, it's worth doing and investigating that. So not to beat a dead horse any further, but yeah, I'll leave that up to you if you want to do it exactly the way Tin Can Knits shows on her blog, or do it the way I did it. It's entirely up to you, because you're the boss.